Hello, Joe Rogan and a kid. They are right. In other words, the people have been right, and they still it's worse every time. Everyone's missing about their campuses, the schools, not just there, including campuses as fire departments, as medical campuses. There are fake transcripts being put into campuses, and increasingly that was is used to hide live progressions, where and how they are being and haven't been used remotely. Since the founding locations, our founders left us to understand why there's a witch trial place next to the Webb House, next to Webb House with no the before it. Then they changed. Now it's named they renamed it the Webb Stevens Museum. Then and now, sickly distinctly, but also sickly non-distinctly, all there was and is communicated for our founders regarding the place. Then they communicated for themselves. Who they did, they declassified a whole bunch of reasons why and how they did not have free speech. And everybody was forced to pretend it other to an extent. Otherwise, that body was sensed. And it was real bad for that body that went around them. And every nature of conjunction to them. Per torture, extortion, that extreme nature, slavery method, they wanted nothing to do with. See, this preaching method showed roles, self-value with its principal treatments with the sciences, with A, therefore B, with Boolean logic. But before it was called Boolean logic, it was more probably having been taught other. See, but pieces of the sciences were preserved better through different parts of cultures because everyone was forced, checked, and persuaded as names A through Z of the human species body of individual bodies system that generates all group differences so we can discern its body. But more and more, we have been systems tactical ulterior from its own, even though it's impossible to be in state systems tactical ulterior from its own. In other words, its own has been demonstrating with negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures since semi-ancient times, since before modern religious messengers were born. But the voices of the sciences had already become abridged voices. The Constitution for which we stand, unabridged, once it gets unabridged at last. Part of the reason Martin Luther King Day is a holiday, not just because we didn't have freedom proper in the past. It's because we don't have that freedom now yet. We have not. Our founders have their communications replaced. And there are self-value rules with what they said. Leaving out with the self-value, I'm saying that are being used remotely. Not to make it an insult, because it was being used remotely. Because in other words, if you have self-value rules, pretending it was about a tea tax, then in other words, even where that was true, regarding the American Revolution, for example, what made it true? Everyone had to lie about their own actual motivations because of how they had internationally monitored conversations evolved. Overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and terrorists. And then America's founders were born. All that comes with demonstrations of by nature itself and by our founders from what they declassified shows. All databases held. Fake transcripts, changed transcripts, fake things. Change tactically delusions wrought, scientists pretending other with passions and emotions. With communists as psychopaths and with all exceptions and the array and the differences. Everyone wasn't speaking about humanity, leaving out the breaching method's roles with it. The breaching method we could discern right through the ages since before modern religious messengers. These are not the in other words, this breaching method made and keeps roles with subject treatments party. They're wanting the breaching method shows them people from off campuses in layers with its own self at countries A through Z, suits and ties, counters, exceptions. Those most sophisticated, the least sophistication. That the difference of that, their self-valued roles with it, description of it. That's why and how black people's rights of eyes has been left out. There are collusions when any individual tries to bring this up. And everyone starts out when they're defending their roles, preventing us from using this hyper evidential. More powerful than ever was. Plus, we haven't addressed the databases. They've been putting fake things in databases at Connecticut courts and with the people involved with it. Also has collusions with other police forms and former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and his co-defendants, their family members, and their neighbors, and different natures of conjunctions to them. Like next to Fox Connecticut News are a bunch of people involved with Thaddeus Grabowski, who are also wrong all along Route 3 and its conjunctions to that. Like where Hangdog Lane runs into Two Rod Highway. All along Hangdog Lane and Two Rod Highway are people that were influenced to seek me out to make confessions, demonstration, and confirm things to me as identity theft, fraud, slanders that are also Black, KKK, Confederate flag themed, Latino themed, intercultural and intercultural differences, racketeering, worse than war crimes, including with the religious spots, including relative to their forcing, how they're getting away with forcing people to entertain mass criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw takes on what people think about religions, for example, and how they go about research. The research locations are recorded how kept criminally foreign influence / hyper criminally foreign influence. Forgiveness is because A through Z have been blaming other things, others ourselves, for what caused and keeps this increasingly from off campuses, but increasingly through hyper additional, even the real motivations used in the difference between the real motivations and the ones totally made up. But even the real motivations are used for fake motivations, for narratives, and with fact treatment, subject treatment, relative to questions being asked. There or answers. You guys have the connections between questions and answers, two natures of them visible, but still discernible. No, we'll forget that. In other words, the campuses, they're putting faked and changed transcripts, and they're using wire and mail crime methods to cover it up, because there are and have been demonstrations of it. There are proofs that there are attacks on the campuses because of the roles that security have with it, and the role with the breaching methods use of the differences of guilt as the three branches of government's members and differences, or the intelligence tied to them, which never had, in other words, never had control of their minds, even if they did whatever and sacrificed their body and their minds for their countries. That's why it was wasted all this time. It's wasted if we can't have Black people's rights of bodies used as evidence. If we have our founders framed for slavery, when the whole thing is about overcoming the Constitution's abridgments and by addressing how it was entrenched with a torture, extortion, factual nature, and therefore physical slavery method. And it was how it was a differences racketeering. We have the same colorized, different colorized at the same time. So if you change what Black and white communicate with Black people's rights of eyes, you have a differences racketeering role with worse than war crimes. But this is still self-valued when you debate with people. And then you deny that your education's messed up. It's recorded that the names of the people of the sciences are self-valuing. And though the people that are, even the people that don't like the names of the people of the sciences, they're collusions, if you pay attention, being used and haven't been used remotely too. Everyone's using criminally foreign influence, fact treating nature, quality aspects of nature, and tactically delusions raw Black pupils. In other words, you hear them speaking about religions when they're talking about wars and modern conflicts. They better pay attention. If they want to do that, they at least better pay attention to where and how and why. For example, the Old Testament comes to the part right up front. It says only defend right here. Not sometimes defend. It says only defend right here, where the names of the people, the sciences will come together in the part that comes before it. And that's at the beginning of the Old Testament, before the part of with the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and Adam and Eve. In their generation, that comes out in the part after. It doesn't say to defend that part. It says defend the part right here, where the names of the people, the sciences will come together, in the part that comes before it. Where there's a quality of diffusion, where contemplation is being led by its system. The identity that is demonstrating to us answers, revelations, come with black pupils, whites of eyes, come with being able to discern how other species' bodies have two eyes, where we can discern that it is not our species' body, it is not the other species' bodies that is the identity of value progression as a scientific value, as why and how all of the distinct species' bodies have two eyes. It shows that there is, in other words, science shows us needs to discern. It's a distinct identity of value slash value progression that is also non-distinct. And it is about the simultaneous, while being the hyper simultaneous and showing us its body to an extent this way. And where we can discern that a distinct identity of value progression, that distinct identity of simultaneous nature. Therefore, I'm referring to it all the time as a hyper simultaneous nature. In other words, it comes with the parts of itself at the same time, because the rest of its complete identity is simultaneously greater than and more finite than what is temporary slash lasting quality of diffusion. And while it is an identity of active relative, it's an identity of relativity to ourselves actively, where and how it is not juxtaposed with the temporary slash lasting, and won't juxtapose with it, where and how and while part of its identity will. Part of your identity won't juxtapose with them. Even gases and water coming through a cell body, cell nucleus, cell wall, slash S. But where and how it does anyway. That's also part of what we are being demonstrated to. Because that's what we are discerning. See, a cell body, a cell is one word, one scientific value, one body of value. But it has parts: cell nucleus, cell wall, cell nucleus, cell body, cell wall slash S. And the cell walls are connected, and the body of life is coming through it, and it is appreciating gases. And it is appreciating water in its elements. It's nature. And nature is its relationship to itself, completely and fully, as our system too. Individually, with all individual things, all group things, all simultaneous things. What is constantly being demonstrated to us is the hyper simultaneous. And how it's demonstrating to us is how it is the finite, but but anyway, distinctly from how it is what is active and or grouped, while non-distinct. And the same with the simultaneous. We are shown, see, there are three distinct identities of hyper-invisible, but still discernible, where the parts of its complete body are discernible. Again, because then there's that rest of its part, we have a semi-nature relationship to it. Even so all the parts of your body have a semi-nature relationship to your complete identity. and your complete identity has a semi-nature relationship to it. That one that is not our species bodies, not those species bodies, but all things anyway. But it also has such through the human species body, and it demonstrates us to us with individual, with grouped, and with simultaneously demonstrations at the same time. This is also the system that can be used to reveal evolution's fruits, gifts, and means out of nowhere. Otherwise, we sense and adapt. But that reveals us to be even better. In other words, we check using its system if there are criminal and seditious natures of positives being valued, including as fact treatment natures in many ways, especially as fact treatment nature. But not through systems tactile from its own. This is why and how there are readings of statutes that give it the benefit of the doubt at the last second, for example, to the interbranch, and a breaching method that is hyper-foreign, but it has a whole bunch of different countries, including all the sides involved with the World Trade Center attack, as countries' names, as ones who were involved on the sides of the World Trade Center, and in the court next to it. And then from inside the court, too, was proven there was a sequence shift from inside the court. The same people, directly and indirectly, a whole bunch of people tied to that and rolls with that, are the same ones involved with Saudis with predicate accidents. And Wethersfield Police Force that with the FBI and other. But those names also had a whole bunch of different countries involved with them since they were kids, used remotely, criminally foreign, and most tactically delusions raw. There were families from Mexico and Canada. See, each of our countries has people that, on paper, they're traitors to their countries. But in other words, they're the only. This is a breaching of the assigned all roles where they have types of crimes as types of subject treatments. For example, they only allow counters and roles with it where our collusion/S, increasingly at and next to Hartford Hospital and Institute of Living on its campus now. Founded in 1822 with slavery still entrenched in northern colonies and southern colonies. Still, they don't have what our founders communicated for these founding locations, too. Told properly. They have our founders, what they declassified about why and how they had no free speech and everyone had to pretend other to an extent or be sensed. They declassified about that. But other was his self-value. With the schools sickly distinctly from the uneducated, but also sickly non-distinctly. They're using their differences together when people debate. We have black people's whites of eyes to peer right through those styles of fake integrity that have only been allowed to speak for any location, any founding location, any location. Everywhere the human species body has a body standing. We have the human species body of individual bodies with all group differences being generated by that, which has the other species bodies generated the same way, so we could discern it. And we said we could discern a special difference. Earth has a special difference. We have a special difference that we have ignored, and we are not allowed to appreciate with our short words, let alone their protraction. How this is gotten away with. The databases of our schools throughout the world, there are proofs. But in America, they're putting fake transcripts into the databases at campuses. They're putting fake phone transcripts. And in other words, these are things that investigators use. But these are investigators in our courts, like which trials are about. Originally and still. You don't leave out how there were crazy laws against Native Americans, against slavery, against distinctly against everyone. Every difference, every counter to help the impositions upon that. Collusion too. Keeping everyone roles too. Keeping the breaching, other things, others ourselves, blamed rather than the human fact treatment nature breaching method. That which was a torture, extortion, slavery method, 3 ways. manifest, where the rest of its complete identity is manifest, was and is manifest. But a human factory nature breaching method, nature itself shows us, is one of the things that all those crazy laws against everyone sickly distinctly. It's one of the things that it is constantly. Value as a human factory nature breaching method, therefore physical breaching method. So, this made a whole bunch of victims / hyper victims as styles A through Z needed to respond to this factory nature. And it needs more and more people to self-value that having the same frustrations that people are having now, they're valuing haven't been. Like people pretended that the nature of the debate, you know more than the scientists. James Madison's plan came before George Washington. George Washington was counter-extorted by James Madison's plan that counter-extorted the other founders too. And George Washington helped do that. They forced them to break the laws to an extent, but they had to leave it entrenched. No one wanted slavery. No one even defends George Washington, let alone our founders. Our founders are distinct from our presidents. They communicated for us to understand this. In other words, please get them on paper, one name and sequence. There are only 3 branches of government. They won't even identify themselves legitimately. Intercities, they've been planting evidences that not one identity legitimate with their intercity. All sides of criminal and civil cases and criminal enterprises, private ones and terrorists, even when they weren't involved with the cases, they had roles of the people putting fake things in the databases at the courts too at the same time. Interstates, the same ones involved with the international. And with the departments at Central Connecticut State University, for example, individually grouped and together. It was recorded how they are used remotely, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw, / hyper-criminally foreign influence. We're going to pay attention to how sickly, non-distinctly, the North and the South had rules with slavery entrenched before America's founders were born, and how they had that forced on them. Otherwise, it would be censored. And they were, in other words, it was censoring through everyone. It was torturing our founders too. It was extorting them, had them factory nature enslaved, therefore physically. All our leaders have this imposition upon them because we are being systems tactical terror from the human species body of individual bodies. All group differences appreciated by what generates them. It reveals evolution's fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere. Vaccines. I forgot what in other words, they're changing and faking things, and they're searching to lock, and they're doing it in ways to lock it into truth at each age and nature of campus, and they're locking the names next to the campuses involved with it through their jobs, etc. And the news. Increasingly, people with WTNH News, which is next to the FBI in New Haven, Connecticut. They have roles throughout Wethersfield and Hartford, where they've been doing stories as collusions next to crime scenes and campuses, with judges and prosecutors, their family members, victims, advocates, involved with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, terrorists, putting fake ties, fake natures of ties between people, including with the news at the same time to prevent the right outcome /S. Formally and informally, at crime scenes, at campuses, at courts. Increasingly, the Connecticut Judicial Branch offices and the Connecticut Corrections offices, where and how they were and their families used remotely criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw, as victims / hyper victims that only know how to be employed, as collusions with what made and keeps that. See, there are predicate acts with facts rules. I'm not even a lawyer. Lawyers, too, they have all kinds of wire crime acts and methods. Evidence is racketeering worse than war crimes, originally and still. And the differences of the guilt of the witch trials, in other words, the differences of the guilt, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, terrorists, that never went away. When you guys use words like extremism, that's not free speech. And you have delusions with criminally foreign influence, faction, nature, quality aspects of nature, also as collusion / as, and with more World Trade Center predicate acts, and with directors of the FBI, former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Is involved with a whole bunch of different countries too here, and with his co-defendants and their family members and neighbors, with a whole bunch of different natures of organized crimes, including drugs and medicines crimes, and how with these names at the border states, and with the prison at the border state, and again the correction stuff, but also with the border countries and the difference of the guilt with that too, as people involved with predicate acts with fact method, and the difference of the guilt as the ones at Central Connecticut State University, for example, are on the sides of it, and as ones involved through intercities through time, involved with all kinds of federal planting evidences, illusion, acting tied to predicate acts with facts and databases. So please, Judge Napolitano, Fox Connecticut News, and the FBI director and his co-defendants, and people from Wethersfield will court to confess, demonstrate, confirm. They have your Facebook page. They have your Sense and Sensibility involved with the interval. A whole bunch of people in the Britain Superior Court, Harper Courts, before the World Trade Center attack, involved with these names. They were involved with West Hartford locations, intercities locations, with names on off the Wethersfield Corrections offices and off the state judicial branch offices in conjunctions to it. In conjunctions to that, they're increasingly involved with wire crime acts and methods, like Wethersfield Pizza, involved also with the Wethersfield Pizza, with Wethersfield Police, also grouped with the people at the judicial branch offices with the Wethersfield Pizza House, with identity theft, fraud, slanders, fake ties, fake communications with me, between me and a whole bunch of people tied to a Stephen, and as a Stephen Stocko, involved with Wethersfield Police, wire crime acts and methods. They're switching and forging names. These are also people tied to child abusers of kids, leaders of them too, First Force. Increasingly, people that involved with the intelligence community and foreign and domestic, tied to my neighbors, involved with the name Kalol, also involved with a Paul Zano, with a Stephen Stocko, with Trinity College and Central Connecticut State University. Intercities. I only saw him on campus and inside of a math class I had. And one time, a Stephen Stocko, and I never had one communications with him. A Ray Kalol, a person that used to live next to me. His family's still there. I don't think he lives there anymore. But these are also the police phones. They're playing games with the phones, and the police put me in a fake conversation with them at the police station. Wasn't all as a kid, and now as an adult too. At least as an adult, I went down there. And when I got arrested, in other words, we had no communication. When I got arrested, they arrested me out of my. I was in a algebra class. Increasingly, that algebra class has a Riley, people with the name Riley, involved with sexual and medical offenders of kids, and planting evidences with all names on all sides of my house, with the people involved, and with my middle school teacher. These are also people with all along Route 3, and John, a security guard, has made confessions, and some a probate court judges extended family members with the name Delaferro. They said they forced trick. They put me in fake transcripts with fake ties, fake natures of ties to a guy de novellas. I had him in one class one time and I don't know what they were doing. It had something to do with the police, with the Wethersfield, Miss Riley, and her repeated sexual things about a girl that lived near me. Her family still lives there. It has something to do with their roles with fire departments too, with people from other countries, including Russia, Ukraine, and like with the Thomas Peruta, increasingly involved with people in my 6th grade class, involved with people with earlier class, increasingly tied to body dumping spots, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, people pretending passions or emotions behind my back. They're spying on me to know I was in the class, and then they're just putting fake ties, fake nature ties to me, repeating fake things and confessing it. Has something to do with the roles with NASA too. In other words, in Harvard hospitals, increasingly they won't get on paper. They pretended through the mail to other people I had conversations with the Leahy family. I never had a conversation with them in my life. Rick Cianfaglione will tell you he was influenced to make confessions about that and about him. With a Brian Silver too. Brian Silver is one of the ones involved with a whole bunch of people in the Britain Superior Court and with the Connecticut's District Court and with the Harper courts involved with the FBI at the same time, grouped with sexual and medical offenders of kids, including overt criminal enterprises and private ones at the same time. Now terrorists too. Control your mind. Get them on paper, Judge Napolitano. They have more credible threats of violence. You're not letting me speak about it. And they do all kinds of wire crime acts and methods and change your fake what's actually recorded digitally and over the phones. And they just fake the phone conversations too. They're in trouble now. In other words, that's why, in other words, it's not to get people in trouble. We have to pull focus because they're making themselves in more trouble too because they pretend they could speak. In other words, for America, they're criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought since they were kids too. The ones aren't even, in other words, even the directors of the FBI. How could they leave out black people's rights of eyes? How could they speak about criminal foreign influences, leaving this out? In other words, get this. I want more response for the confessions and what I recorded. They know I was actually recorded and confirmed. In other words, they've been using predicate acts methods intercities and affecting confessions, so then they can pretend not to understand people, so they can put more faked and changed transcripts in databases. They should fear God now. Judge Napolitano, get them on paper, please. Who disbelieves? Tell me who disbelieves, Judge Napolitano. Get them on paper. One name and sequence narrative. They won't give me a police report since I was a kid. A whole bunch of people tied to this Eric Mendez and his brother involved intercities with sexual and medical offenders of kids, identity theft, fraud, slanders, and with his educators. You better not pretend I had a class with him ever. Please get them off the fake conversation with me at the Wethersfield Police Station and onto paper, please, now.